Which of the non-dairy plant-based beverages are equivalent nutritionally to dairy milk? What are their strengths and weaknesses? And if you stick to the end of this video, I'm going to provide you with a tool that you can use when you go shopping and you want to explore this ever-expanding world of non-dairy plant-based beverages so that you can select the best for your individual circumstances. I'm Dr. Gili. I'm a practicing internal medicine physician and a nutritionist, and let's delve straight into this. In order to keep this easy to digest, pun intended here, I chose to focus on a limited number of nutrients for good reason. It's a very difficult enterprise we are engaging in here because you have over 20 non-dairy milks, plant-based beverages on the market here in the US, plus you have a variety of cow or dairy milk. You have whole, you have low fat, and so forth. So in order to develop that tool that allows you, when you go to the grocery store and you wonder, should I get soy, should I get almond, should I get rice milk, and what's the difference here? In order to understand how to easily navigate that confusion, you have to have a tool that I'm going to help you develop and use it right here. As you are familiar perhaps, if you look on any food item that has a nutrition label, you will see these percentages that are under the column of percentage daily value. These don't add to 100 at the bottom as you may be tempted to think. Each one of these actually is a percentage of the daily value that is considered appropriate for an adult to eat in a day, an adult who say ingests about 2,000 calories. So 12% means this item provided already 12% of the total amount of saturated fat that that person could eat in a day, considered to be the safe limit to eat in a day. And in that context, if we understand this percentage daily value, we can make use of these two items here that I listed. If a food provides an ingredient that is at 5% or less than the daily value, we can say that that food is a poor source of that nutrient, or the amount it contributes is low. On the other hand, if it provides 20% or more of the daily value of that nutrient, we can say that it's a good source, it's rich in that nutrient. And here is the comparison framework. This is the tool, the essence of the tool that I want to share with you. And that is made of 7 items. First of all, that food or non-dairy milk should provide at least 20% of vitamin D, B12, and calcium, at least 5 grams of protein, less than a gram of saturated fat, less than 120 calories. All of this is per serving, less than 115 grams of sodium, and at least 1.5 grams of fiber. Now, I'm sure you may be wondering, where in the world do you come up with 115 grams of sodium? Why not 100 or 120? Well, here's where this filter or tool that I just presented comes from 2 things. First, it comes from what the daily value for each of these important nutrients that we are focusing on today is, and you see the actual values here. Again, for an adult consuming about 2,000 calories per day, this is how much of each of these nutrients they should eat. In some cases, a minimum amount when it comes to this calcium, vitamin D, and so forth. In other cases like sodium or sugars or saturated fat, the maximum amount considered safe or appropriate per day. And then in the third column here, you have how much whole dairy milk provides of each of these nutrients, both in the actual amount and in percentage. So you can see here for calcium, for a cup of whole milk provides 21% of the daily need. And you have 16% of vitamin D, 46% of vitamin B12, and so forth. One thing that I want you to be aware of, although many people don't think of it this way, whole dairy milk, and any dairy milk, whether it's even non-fat milk, has lactose, which is a form of simple sugar. And the amount of that this provides is no less than 20, almost 25, almost a quarter of the maximum daily allowance, which is 50 grams, you have in 1 cup of non-dairy milk. I'm sure this may come as a surprise to many of you because a lot of people don't think of dairy milk as a rich source of sugar. They think it's low carb, when in fact, if you drank 2 cups ounce of this, you got over 50% of your daily allowance of simple sugar per that day. And the same is true about saturated fat, especially for the whole. Non-fat drops that to almost nothing. But if you drink whole dairy milk, you get almost a quarter of your daily allowance of saturated fat from that 1 cup alone. So it is a high-fat, high-sugar product, relatively speaking. And then here's the filter that I presented to you earlier for all of these nutrients as far as a target level for non-dairy plant-based beverages. And so we decided to keep these 3 items, vitamin D, B12, and calcium, at 20% of the daily allowance, partly looking at how much dairy milk provides, but also partly understanding that a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times when people go to non-dairy milks, they are on a movement to move away for animal foods, to become maybe plant-based or more plant-based. And in doing so, the sources of calcium and vitamin D and B12 especially are going to be more limited in that person's diet. And therefore, we want this to provide at least 20% of their daily need. For sodium, we set the bar of 5%, which, remember, it's low for the daily value because we have too much sodium in our diet in the Western world. And that's why this 5% of this 2,300 milligrams per day gives us this funny number of 115. That's where that comes from. And then for protein and sugar, we settle at 10%, which is midway, kind of intermediate range between 5 and 20%. And that's where those numbers come from. And same with the saturated fat here at 5%. We want less of that. We set the bar low. And then for the fiber, even though it's a good thing, we set the target low at 5%, just because putting a lot more fiber in a non-dairy milk will change the consistency. And again, most people don't look at milk, even if it's plant-based, as a major source of fiber. Now, going back to our tool here, you can pause this video, you can write it down. This is the best I found. Credit belongs to a study I'm going to show and share with you in a minute here, published by one of my mentors, Dr. Winston Craig, a couple of years ago, comparing, I believe they had 148 or so non-dairy milks in various places around the world, not just here in the United States. So when it comes to those 3 ingredients I mentioned earlier, calcium, vitamin D, and vitamin B12, they look to see how many of these overall were fortified with these important nutrients and in green, and how many were fortified at least the 20% target level with orange or yellow. So as you can see, for calcium, we're talking about 70 to 80%, pretty good, of samples being fortified adequately. For vitamin D, less than a quarter had 20% fortification level, and for B12, less than 40% had that 20% level. And this is important. This is an opportunity for the producers of this food to improve these products. And it's also a reason, very important reason, for you to check the label and make sure you get 20% of all of these 3 nutrients. That's very important, especially if you're on a plant-based or predominantly plant-based diet. The other thing that we discussed, at least 5 grams of protein per serving. These are all per serving here. You see, only 27% of these non-dairy products provide that much. This is important, especially for people who use these products to substitute dairy milk in children, in adolescents, in pregnancy or lactation, because during those times the protein need is important. Even in older people who would need a higher level of protein intake to prevent bone or muscle loss, and even during weight loss, you want to choose a variety of non-dairy plant-based milk that has enough protein, at least 5 grams, as you see here. Cow or dairy milk has 7 or 8 grams per serving. Saturated fat, they do very well, obviously, because there's little of that in plant foods in general. With sugar, as I mentioned, 60% met the target. So again, non-dairy milks are not a sugar-loaded beverage, at least compared to dairy milk. for sure. And calorie intake also less than 120 calories, which is less than what a serving or a cup of dairy milk provides. Sodium, pretty good. Fiber, like I said, not that good, but again, it's not a crucial thing to have fiber in that. And coming back to the protein content here for a couple of minutes, you see here a breakdown along the same criteria we discussed earlier. We're going to focus on protein primarily right now and say that of all these different types of milks they looked at in this table, you see that for the ones that met the threshold of at least 5 grams of protein, soy did the best, 100% of samples. No wonder soy is rich in protein. Pea did very well, and in general, legume and nuts, nut milks did well at 83%, but the rest kind of failed this criteria. So again, if protein intake is important, and for most age groups it is important, you want to choose a type of non-dairy milk that has at least 5 grams per serving if you're replacing on a consistent basis non-dairy for the dairy milks. I wanted to share with you something that I discussed at length in another video. I'm going to try to put a link here for you to see that, but here I'm just going to delve for a moment into the essential or indispensable amino acid composition of soy milk compared to dairy milk. Dairy is in blue, soy is in red. As you can see, for the 9 essential amino acids that our body cannot produce and we have to get them from food, these are the DV percentages for those in these 2 types of beverages. For dairy milk, the supply is pretty balanced across these 9 essential amino acids. For soy milk, though, you see kind of a downtrend here between histidine and methionine. So especially these 2 here, lysine and methionine, you need a lot to get to 100%. Now, I'm rushing to add that I don't think anybody should rely on non-dairy milk, even soy milk, to satisfy their daily protein needs. You know, you want to have at least 5 grams of protein, but recognize even then, even the best of the bunch, the soy perhaps is not the best. Quinoa or even peas have a more balanced protein profile. But there's this idea in the population and even on the cartons of soy milk where they claim the protein is complete. And yes, it has all the 9 essential amino acids, but not quite in the right amount. For methionine especially, you need 10 glasses a day to get to 100%. But again, a lot of people are on plant-based, myself included. We eat a variety of plant foods. So what soy milk is low on, you can supplement or make up with other types of plant foods that you can eat even that milk with. So a problem, but not really a problem if you do it right, okay? And the other thing is to recognize that when we make soy milk, we basically refine the soybeans and we lose about half of the amount of protein and essential amino acids in the process. For each one of those, you see how it drops from blue, which is the whole soybeans, to the red, which is the soy milk. It drops in by about 50%. So now the take-home point here is, if you, on the long term, if you rely on soybeans for the protein, go for the whole soybeans rather than the soy milk, because you are going to get twice for the same amount of calories in terms of protein content. And here are some practical recommendations that I think are important to remember from our discussion so far. And first of all, always check the nutrition label. Always go for the 20% in calcium, vitamin D, and B12. And also, if you want to go deeper, if you look at the ingredients list below the label, go for calcium carbonate fortified milks, because this has absorption rates similar to the milk coming from dairy sources, as opposed to the 3-calcium triphosphate, which has lower absorption rates. Secondly, if you are looking to replace dairy milk with non-dairy beverages, you want to focus on the more protein-rich ones. I mentioned the soy, the pea, the quinoa, which is really a really good quality one if you can find it. And you want to go more like 7 grams per serving if you can. Remembering that you also have to mix and match a variety of other good protein sources of plant foods if you're on a plant-based diet in the day to make up for those amino acids that are lower, especially in soy milk. I may have come across as bashing non-dairy milks. Quite the contrary. I don't drink dairy milk myself. I like soy milk, but I want to be aware of the pluses pluses and the minuses of these beverages. But on the plus side, remember, sugar content is a lot better than a lot of people realize, and definitely better than dairy milk. Fat content is a lot better. Cholesterol, we didn't even talk about that, is a lot better. There is no cholesterol in plant foods. And only 17% of samples that they looked at in that study I quoted on the market had amounts of sugar over that threshold of 5 grams per serving, which is really remarkable. And for diabetic patients, this is of special interest. There is another study here a number of years ago about the glycemic index of these non-dairy beverages compared to dairy here, which has a glycemic index 47. So if you look at soy unsweetened soy milk, it's the same, similar to almond unsweetened. But as soon as you sweeten these things, it jumps up by 15 points or so. But overall, we're not talking about deal breakers here across all this continuum, except these two guys here, which is rice and coconut milk. Those guys have glycemic indices close to 100. So for diabetics, I would totally avoid those. Really brief here for sustainability. This is a study done by folks in Oxford in the UK, and they looked at the environmental impact on producing a glass of milk. They are more frugal there. They consider a glass 200 ml apparently. For dairy, across the board, it sticks out as a very environmentally intensive milk to produce when it comes to emissions, land use, and water use. And there's no wonder, because raising that cattle takes a lot of work, a lot of water, a lot of land. It produces a lot of methane and so forth. But the other thing I want to remember when it comes to water, rice and almond are very water intensive. You see here, not as much as dairy, but significantly more than the others. When it comes to land use, you see the huge stark contrast here between dairy and non-dairy milks. A couple of concerns that people oftentimes raise when we talk about non-dairy beverages. First that I hear from women is, doesn't it increase my risk of breast cancer? Quite the contrary, actually. If you look at the data, it actually lowers or is associated with a lower risk of cancer. Important distinction there. But certainly you don't see the opposite. From the male population, I often hear this concern: wouldn't it cause my testosterone to go down? Would it cause feminization, gynecomastia? Again, quite the contrary. If you look at the data, good quality data, you see that it actually has no impact on the total testosterone, free testosterone, estrogen levels in men. There may be some concern in people who use a large amounts of this. I've seen a case study for a guy who was drinking 1.5 liters of soy milk every day for years, apparently developed gynecomastia. But those are extreme cases. Rice milk and arsenic, that is actually a concern with rice in general, not just rice milk. When they looked at how much you can find in rice, it's actually sometimes more than it's considered safe in drinking water. So especially for children below the age of 5, they should avoid this drink. And even adults, I wouldn't drink more than a couple of times a week maybe. There is also this concern about carrageenan in some of these beverages that used to be used before as a thickening or gelling agent. Nowadays 80% of this don't use this because there's this concern in animal studies that there may be a slightly increased risk of digestive cancers for animals who are fed a chemically modified form of this carrageenan. While inadvertently a lot of people fear soy milk because they think it may increase their risk of breast cancer, actually we have today studies such as from Adventist Health Study 2 showing an association between higher intakes of dairy milk and breast cancer risk in women. And most of this risk is attributed to estrogen compounds present in dairy milk naturally, especially in today's age where the dairy industry has gone a long way to produce essentially genetically modified cattle, where these guys can produce milk well into their next pregnancy at a time where their hormonal levels increase. The amount of estrogens and other hormones in the milk we get from these animals is significant, and it seems to be showing in the increased risk of breast cancer. Anyways, I hope what I presented here is of interest. Let me know in the comment section below what you think, what your experience with these non-dairy beverages has been. If you have any other questions that I haven't covered here, I'll be happy to try and address them. Until next time, you stay healthy and you stay wise, my friend.